It refers to Buttigieg saying, "We're so blessed this weak little girl moved to Michigan. Looks like he's bringing all of his California dreaming here with him." And she put a shot of a California freeway with the banner that says California's ban on new gas cars. What's your response?
All I'll say is that I'm raising a little girl and a little boy, and I'm going to raise them with better values than the chairwoman. We need to talk about policy disagreements respectfully.
First of all, good on Pete for the classy answer to someone who very decidedly deserves anything but class. There was a time that the GOP at least pretended to identify as the party of values. At least now they don't have to insult us with those obvious misrepresentations anymore. Now, I wouldn't normally consider it newsworthy when one homophobic asshole insults a gay Secretary of Transportation in Pete Buttigieg. But in this particular instance, it's newsworthy because Michonne Maddock is the Michigan chair of the GOP. In the state of Michigan, she represents the entire party. So when she logs onto Twitter, onto her official account of co-chair Michonne, where it says Michigan Republican Party co-chair right there on her banner, she is acting on behalf of her entire party. So when she decides to lob some outright homophobia on that platform, she doesn't just represent herself, she's basically saying, this is the position of the GOP. And so while there have been calls for Maddox's removal as co-chair, it actually wouldn't make sense to remove her because that would suggest that her comments are out of line with the GOP, and they're not. The reason that she feels comfortable saying these things out in the open is that these things are commonplace within her party. What she said isn't a bug, it's a feature. I mean, let's just be honest here. This is what the GOP in the Trump era represents. If you were wondering where every douchebag from high school ended up, there's now an entire leadership structure in one of our major political parties that serves as a home to them. And so Republicans log onto Twitter to show people how homophobic or racist or misogynistic or xenophobic or anti-Semitic they can be. That's what you get with the GOP these days. A pissing contest to show just how much you can appeal to the farthest fringes of an overwhelmingly shrinking, overwhelmingly old, overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly uneducated base whose entire identity is predicated on its own fear of being displaced. I gotta say, for a party that beats its chest for being tough, they sure do seem pretty fragile. And beyond that, here's what I don't understand. What's the GOP's strategy here? What's the long game? Already the Republican Party is too old, too white, too rural. They're losing young people, they're losing people of color, they're losing LGBT Americans, they're losing union workers, they're losing the suburbs, they're losing women, and now, thanks to their position on abortion, they're losing a whole raft of other people who otherwise would have had no interest before in supporting Democrats. So when these Republicans log onto Twitter to lob some casual homophobia, is the plan to just double down on the bigots who they've already got? Because that's not going to grow their party. All it's going to do is ensure that this new generation of Americans, who is very much in support of LGBT rights, will never support a political party whose identity is predicated on bigotry. And by the way, this isn't the first time that Buttigieg has been devastatingly effective in terms of protecting a class of people who are otherwise abandoned by the GOP. Just weeks ago, despite spending years grandstanding about their support for the troops, Republicans decided to vote against funding health care for sick veterans by opposing the Pact Act. Here's what Pete had to say about that during my most recent interview with him. So I want to start in a bit of an unorthodox way here, since this isn't your professional area, but this past week, the Pact Act was finally passed after Senate Republicans took a beating for initially blocking it as retaliation for Democrats introducing a reconciliation bill. So as someone who served in the military and who knows about all the sacrifices that our veterans have made, how does it make you feel, not as a public servant, but as a person, when you saw Republicans vote against this?
Well, one thing a lot of veterans frequently feel is the sensation of being used as political props. And when you see people who don't hesitate to embrace veterans for a photo op or politically convenient opportunity, but then not be there when veterans actually need you for something as important as protecting them when they've been exposed to toxins as a direct result of service in a war zone, it's infuriating. And better late than never. I'm glad that they got this done. It should never have been this hard. These same senators voted for it before they voted against it, before they voted for it, and especially in a party that has long tried to present itself as the more pro-national security party, although I don't think any party has a monopoly on that. It was a frustrating thing to watch. But also, let me say this, a real testament to the power of people with a lot of moral authority standing up for themselves. And, you saw those vets out there on the Capitol steps day and night. And I think really did leave those senators, those Republican senators who had flip-flopped, really left them with no choice but to come in and do the right thing.
So at least you can find solace in the fact that oftentimes Republicans aren't only out to attack the LGBT community, they're also out to attack our nation's own veterans. At least they're consistent with their abandonment of giant swaths of our own population. And consider too, while all of this abhorrent behavior is going on, while these Republicans are falling over themselves to broadcast just how bigoted they can be, Democrats are at least using your tax dollars to govern. They've passed the infrastructure package, for starters, which Pete himself is crisscrossing the country allocating funding for. That was a punchline in the Trump era. Now it's a reality. They've passed the American Rescue Plan. They passed the first gun bill in decades. They passed the CHIPS Act, which funds the semiconductor chip industry right here in the United States. They passed the Pact Act, funding veteran health care. They've passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the biggest climate investment in the history of the world. It's a bill that finally allows the government to negotiate lower drug prices. It forces billion-dollar companies that pay zero in taxes to at least pay a 15% corporate minimum tax, and it beefs up IRS enforcement to catch wealthy tax cheats. They've added 10 million jobs, the most ever at this point in a presidency. The unemployment rate is at a 50-year low. NATO is stronger than ever. The leader of Al-Qaeda is dead, and 43 million American borrowers will benefit from student loan debt relief. I don't care if you're left, right, or center, that is objectively among the most effective presidencies in modern American history. That's what it looks like when Democrats use their majorities to govern in a way that'll help the most people humanly possible. Although, to be fair, it's not like Republicans did nothing when Trump was president. They did pass a tax cut, the benefits of which overwhelmingly went to millionaires and billionaires. So for any millionaires and billionaires watching this video right now, I hope you're not feeling left out. At the end of the day, that's where the question lies. When you go to work day in and day out and pay your tax dollars, do you want that money to pay the salaries of people who are looking out for you, who are looking to protect the air you breathe and your right to bodily autonomy, whose policies have created more jobs, whose policies lead to better health outcomes, whose policies seek to put more money in middle-class pockets? Or do you want those tax dollars to go to low-rent Twitter bullies, people who pray at the altar of Donald Trump and no one else, people whose priority is waging culture wars and ginning up faux outrage to scare their own base, people who would quicker lie about election results than bother adopting a popular enough platform to actually win those elections, people who don't want government to work but instead seek to break it, because the choice here is clear. So decide which of those better represents your views and make sure your voice is heard this November. Before you go, couple things. First, if you want to support my work, the best way is to subscribe to this channel. The subscribe button is right here on the screen. And second, if you want to see and hear more from me, check out my website, briantylercohen.com. That way you can get links to my podcast, merchandise, ways to donate to voting rights organizations, and so much more. The thumbnail is also right here on the screen, so go check it out. And as always, thank you so much for watching.